The important thing, though, in having relationships is to understand who you are. What are your needs in relationships? Because while the need for relationship is universal, what kind of relationships and how many relationships, that's particular, that's unique to who you are. Let's revisit another topic that we discussed. The lasagna principle, remember it from the question of happiness? Just to recount, lasagna is my favorite food. Every time I go home, that's what my mom makes for me, a whole large tray of lasagna. But even though it's my favorite food, I wouldn't want to eat it 3 times a day, every day. There is such a thing as too much of a good thing. Similarly with writing, I love to write, but I don't want to write more than 3 to 4 hours a day. I love to teach, but I don't want to teach 8 hours a day. I love spending time with the people who are most dear to me, with my family. But I also want to do other things rather than spend all day, every day with them. Quantity, in other words, affects quality. The same applies to relationships. We all need relationships. We all want relationships. The question is, how much of it do we want? And for every person, it is different. And it is important to make the distinction here between extroverts and introverts. Now, extroverts and introverts vary, first of all, on the number of relationships that they need and want, and the amount of time that they spend within these relationships. So whereas an extrovert would want, say, to have 100 friends, an introvert would want to have 3 friends. An extrovert may want to spend 12 hours of the day with other people. An introvert may want to spend 2 hours of the day with other people. I want to elaborate and go a little bit off on a tangent here, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about extroversion and introversion. So many of you know, whether you're an introvert or extrovert or ambivert, somewhere in the middle. Many of you have taken the Myers-Briggs. So it's important to understand and to make a real distinction so that you know yourself and you're able to apply your knowledge to your life. The most important work done on introversion and extroversion was done by Brian Little, who taught you. Anyone took Brian Little when he was here? Okay, so a couple of you. So he's done work on traits. And one of the 5 traits is extroversion or introversion. And here is what he found. So the research on introversion and extroversion shows that we all have an optimal level of cognitive arousal. Optimal level of cognitive arousal. Introverts, their base level of cognitive arousal is higher than the optimal level. The extroverts, it's lower. It seems counterintuitive, right? Because introverts are much quieter, extroverts are out there. But think about it this way. Why are extroverts always out there? Because they need extra stimulation in order to get to the optimal level of arousal. Why do introverts need to be alone so much of the time? Because being around many people, there's an overload. It's too much. And they need to manage the levels of arousal so that they're lower. Which is why extroverts need a lot of relationships a lot of the time to reach this optimal level of arousal, versus introverts need fewer relationships. But here's the question. What if you're an introvert but you want to do things, you really, really want to do things that are more associated with extroversion. Or you're an extrovert and you want to do things that are more associated with introversion. For instance, you're an extrovert and you need to study for an exam. So yeah, one thing you could do is study in groups. But it's very difficult to read in groups. You need to do the readings too, right, extroverts? What if you're an introvert, though, and you decide when you're 21 that what you really, really want to do with your life is teach? Does that mean not doing it? Does that mean not doing the reading if you're an extrovert? Not necessarily. However, and this is the key point here for introverts and extroverts, you need to understand that you pay a price for it. You pay a price when you go out of your first nature. This is your first nature, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. You're born with it. It's genetic. But you can act out of nature. Right now what I'm doing is acting out of my first nature. I feel much more comfortable in office hours, one-on-one, or sitting in front of my computer and writing. However, what I really, really want to do with my life is teach, and therefore I'm here. And here is the key point with Brian Little's research. Yes, we can act according to our second nature. An introvert can act like an extrovert. But then what he or she needs is what Brian Little calls a restorative niche. A restorative niche. So right after lecture, as you know, I have my office hours, one-on-one with people. After I lecture, I often meditate. I need my fix of solitude. If you're an extrovert and you study by yourself, what you need to do after is to get your restorative niche, which could mean for you going out with your friends on senior night, hanging out with people. If we don't have enough restorative niche, whether we're introverts or extroverts, we pay a high price, which comes in the form of burnout, which is a much more prolonged unhappiness, sadness, and after a while, depression. Know thyself. Know what you want, what your needs are. And even if you want to do something that's out of your first nature, do it. That's fine if it's part of your mission. But at the same time, remember, you need the restorative niche. I just had a conversation with one of the teaching fellows here when I was giving a workshop. And we were talking about the generals, which we both took a few years ago. And I said to her, studying for the generals was a real high for me. I would study most of it, read, just do the reading by myself. And she said it was a nightmare for her. She's an extrovert, I'm an introvert. Every night, after studying for the generals during the day, she had to go out. Every night, after studying the whole day, I was very content spending time with my family. Know thyself, and then be thyself. Act according to your nature. Identify these restorative niches. This is when we refuel. And it's different for each person. There is no right refueling.